Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A little disclaimer at the start of this podcast today. I did have dental surgery last week, and so I'm wearing this retainer, and I hemmed and hawed if I should even record a podcast. So I hope that I sound okay on this episode today. My apologies in advance, but I really have no workaround for this. I have to have this retainer in for about 6 weeks, so bear with me. And we're going to dive right in because we have a lot of ground to cover in today's episode. If you caught the last episode of the Grace and Grit podcast, which was episode 219, you know that we're embarking on a 4-part series around fat loss basics. And if you haven't listened to 219, I highly recommend you start there because in that episode, I clear up some misunderstandings surrounding fat loss, just to make sure we're starting on firm footing. So specifically in episode 219, I talked about the reasons why fat loss gets a bad rap. I talked about the difference between weight loss versus fat loss. I talked about why where you carry your weight matters. We talked about the difference between being fat phobic versus muscle centric. And I also introduced what I call a fat loss triad, which is the way that I talk about fat loss with my own community, which puts mental health at the top. So I enter the conversation from mental health, which if you have listened to any episodes of the Grace and Grit podcast, you know I'm a strong advocate for mental health, especially when it comes to improving our physical health. The second part of the fat loss triad is honoring our hormonal health. And the third part of the triad is the energy in, energy out equation, which is where most people love to start. And I think it's a problem for the other two reasons. If we aren't addressing mental health and hormonal health, the energy in and energy out equation either A, isn't going to work, or it will work for a short period of time, but we won't be able to sustain our results. So today, we are going to lean heavily into the second pillar of that triad, which is healing and fortifying the body. And why are we going here before we talk about energy in, energy out? Because when talking about healthy fat loss, healing and fortifying is the name of the game. I know, surprising, right? Because a lot of people think the name of the game is deprivation and misery. But think about it. In a body whose chemistry is in working order, messages you send your body can be clearly heard and communicated through the proper channels. But in a body whose chemistry is really jacked, the body becomes, in essence, hard of hearing, and messages are not properly translated. And try as you might to do all the right things, you end up a hot, frustrated mess because your body isn't responding. Now, I did an episode really early on in this podcast. It was episode 11, and it was titled Why You Should Focus on Healing, Not Weight Loss, if you truly want to improve your health. And in that episode, I used an analogy of a house. And the analogy was this. If I told you that I wanted to put a fresh coat of paint on a house that was imploding, you would say that I was wasting my money. And yet, this is exactly how I see so many women going about trying to repair their metabolic health. They are so desperate to look better, to feel better, and to basically be better, to live in a better house, that they're willing to overlook the real work that needs to be done to create a long-lasting solution. So the quick fixes that many women are kind of grabbing for are things like dramatic calorie cutting, intense exercise, extreme rules and regulations around food, none of which they can sustain. And look, I get it. Foundations are not glamorous to build. You just want to get to the decorating part, right? We want to decorate our homes. We don't really want to be concerned about the foundation of our homes. But solid foundations are really freaking important to our physiology and our psychology and just generally our overall well-being. Because what we are building on is everything. So just as I believe that slapping a coat of paint on a house that's imploding is kind of premature and really unnecessary and even kind of outrageous, I also believe that calorie cutting and aggressive cardio in a body that is not equipped to handle that level of stress is premature and downright dangerous. No one goes from sitting on a couch to signing up for the Olympics and thinks that that's a healthy choice, right? We realize that athletes condition themselves in order to perform at a high level. But this mentality is what I see so many women doing when they approach fat loss. They are throwing a lot of stress, additional stress, at a body that can't really handle it. So just as an athlete has to fortify their system to be able to handle the demands of competition, you need to heal your system to be able to handle the demands of things like calorie restriction and aggressive exercise programming, if those things are even required at all. So most women don't consider that calorie cutting and exercise are forms of stress, and they're great stressors in a system that can handle them. But to be honest, most women who are experiencing some form of physical and or psychological breakdown are not in the best position to be dealing with more stress. What they need to be focusing on is unloading their stress, repairing their foundation. In other words, women need to heal and fortify their psychology and biology before they add challenges like calorie deficits and intense exercise, if they want to have lasting effects. And truth be told, if women took the time to heal, they may never even need those measures being the calorie deficits and the intense exercise programs. Healing looks like learning to take stock of your total stress load and unpack stress where it's possible to prevent it from disrupting your body's chemistry, which is no small feat in our fast-paced, overwhelming modern-day life. And the process of healing looks wildly different for every woman. Metabolic function, which I've said in previous podcasts, I define metabolism as the efficiency at which your cells do their job. That's what metabolism is. Your cells have a lot of jobs to do, and the rate at which they do those jobs, that's what we refer to as metabolism. And metabolic function is a barometer of stress. So dysfunction in the metabolism is a symptom of your body struggling to cope with your stress load effectively. And when your stress is too high, it makes a lot of sense that your metabolic function is going to decline. And when your stress load is lighter, metabolic function improves significantly. And I think you're going to understand that in a lot greater detail by the end of this episode. You have got to be willing to continuously take stock of your unique stress load, which is different from everyone else's, and why one-size-fits-all programs don't work for long-term metabolic health. So I want to start by just addressing that stress comes in many forms. 6 of the types of stress that I speak usually very deeply to in my work are psychological stressors, nutritional stressors, physiological stressors, chemical and environmental stressors, social stressors, and then what I call habitual pattern stressors. So, our ability to manage our time and our mindset and organize ourselves effectively. So like I said before, chronic stress has become a way of life for most women. And the human body is beautifully designed to handle stress. Of course, like our bodies are brilliant, but we are abusing our body's capacity to manage stress gracefully because we're not taking adequate time to restore. We're not living our life in a way that allows our body to manage stress effectively. And in my opinion, chronic stress really has become a public health crisis. So why is chronic stress a problem for the body? Well, in a nutshell, chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation, we know, is the precursor to organ and endocrine dysfunction. So your organs don't function properly. Your hormonal system does not function properly when we are in a state of chronic inflammation. And we also know that chronic inflammation is the precursor to disease. Chronic inflammation can cause the body to store a lot of excess fat, and higher levels of fat in turn also promote inflammation. So you can get stuck in this nasty cycle of inflammation causing weight gain and weight gain actually causing more inflammation. Here's what I want you to hear. Stress influences everything about your biology and your psychology, because stress directly influences your endocrine system, which is the government of your body. So again, your endocrine system being your hormonal system. When your hormones are jacked, everything gets jacked. Your gut health suffers, your mental health suffers, your organs' ability to function at full capacity suffers, your muscle health suffers, just to name a few things, and all of those things have everything to do with your ability to process fat. Stress is killing us slowly. We've normalized it, right? We've normalized this crazy, fast-paced life. And it's a huge problem, and especially specifically with what we're talking about, which is our body's ability to lose fat. So let's talk more specifically about how high levels of stress can make it so hard for the body to shed fat. So stress is meant to be short-lived. But if someone is constantly dealing with perceived threats, over time, repeated activation of the stress response can take a massive toll on the body and the mind, for that matter. Because whatever your body is being challenged by, your psychology is going to be challenged by. So I want you to remember, right, a little 8th grade biology here. There's 2 parts to the nervous system. You have the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mode, and you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. So the sympathetic nervous system kind of functions like the gas pedal in the car. It triggers the fight or flight response and really gives the body a huge burst of energy so it can respond to whatever dangers are in your presence. Real or imagined, by the way. So we can create a lot of imaginary stress by the way that we think. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, acts like the brakes of the car. It promotes the rest and digest response that calms the body down after the danger has passed. And examples of engaging the parasympathetic nervous system would be things like sleep and nutrition and connection with other people, spending time outdoors, and basically anything that's restorative in nature. And let's be honest, who's got time for that? Right? That's the mentality of a lot of women, especially midlife. Nearly every woman I work with comes to me in a state of chronically pressing down the gas pedal. So they are in a chronic state of that fight or flight mode. And rarely, if ever, are they giving themselves permission to use the brakes, which means they're not giving themselves permission to be in that rest and digest state. And when you're experiencing the sympathetic stress response, fight or flight, your body does an amazing job of down-regulating other systems. Because think about it, if your body needs to provide you with this huge burst of energy, it has to get that energy from somewhere. And so it takes energy from other spaces and places to be able to allow you to run away from the tiger that you think is chasing you. So in an attempt to direct more energy to help you fight or flee, your body will down-regulate things like your immune system, your digestive system, your hormonal system, which is one of the reasons why chronic stress contributes so greatly to gut health challenges, autoimmune disorders, hormonal struggles, and puts the body in a state of chronic inflammation. It's also easy to see how being in a state of chronic stress also taxes the organs tremendously, like the heart, the intestines, your muscles, and your brain. And why staying in a cycle of chronic stress can so easily exhaust those organs. Because we're overusing them. When you're getting ready to run from a lion, everything is on high alert. And when you're in that high alert state all of the time, it breaks your body down. There's a high price to pay for living in that state chronically. Now, your adrenal glands are responsible for pushing out cortisol for you to deal with all the perceived threats. But when the adrenal glands are in hyperdrive, which ladies, for most of you, they probably are if you're living in that chronic state of high stress because you're dealing with too many perceived threats, your adrenals can start to malfunction, which means they start to create too much or too little cortisol. And most of you know cortisol as the primary hormone that helps your body to deal with stress. We want it. Cortisol is awesome. We just don't want too much of it, and we don't want too little of it. There's a fine balance, like there is to everything, right? Chemistry is a fine balance. So when we have too much cortisol in our system, because we're living in a state of chronically pressing down that gas pedal, it impairs the healing and cell regeneration process. Again, our digestion gets disrupted. We have challenges with our cognitive function. So our mental function kind of goes out the window. And our metabolism, our cells' ability to do their jobs well, really starts to suffer. So we might start experiencing a kind of a weakened ability to fight infections. We might start experiencing kind of the chaos of hormonal imbalance. Because when one hormone is affected, it's like dominoes. So many hormones get out of alignment when one hormone gets out of alignment. And when we're talking about cortisol, cortisol has this amazing capacity to disrupt things like DHEA, leptin, ghrelin, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And we start experiencing things like muscle loss, bone density loss, mood swings, depression, hair and skin problems, thyroid imbalances, low sex drive, inability to sleep, and of course, weight gain. Or let's call it what it is, fat gain, especially around the belly, that visceral fat that I talked about in the prior episode, which is so incredibly dangerous. So cortisol can be immensely helpful when we use it for short periods and then return to a resting state. That is the way it's intended to be used. But therein lies the problem, because that's not how most of you are using it. Most of you are living in a state of chronically pressing down that gas pedal, that fight or flight mode, And you're never really getting a physical release of that mode. So cortisol negatively impacts us by damaging tissues and organs and systems in the body, and leaves us a hot, frustrated mess because we feel like we're doing all the right things, but we're not really focusing on the elephant in the room, which is stress. Because nobody wants to slow down in order to speed up. And that's exactly what I am speaking to here. Most women need to slow down to heal and fortify and repair in order to speed up. And here's another thing to know. As we age, our ability to manage cortisol effectively naturally declines. Our cells don't absorb cortisol as easily as they once did as we approach midlife, which means there's more cortisol floating around in our bloodstream, which runs the risk of potentially harming all these tissues and systems. Also, with women in midlife, perimenopause, menopausal years, we tend to be living the most stressful years of our life, mentally stressful years, at a time when some of the very hormones that help us to cope with stress are all over the map. And I'm specifically speaking to progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. So we are not really at an advantage to manage cortisol as we age, which is why so many women experience things like weight gain and all of these byproducts of living a highly stressed out life in midlife. And the hardship doesn't end there. I know, I'm like the bearer of bad news. As I briefly mentioned, during the stress response, blood sugar levels are elevated because that's what helps us to produce that energy to fight or flee from the perceived threat. And when blood sugar is elevated, the pancreas, of course, its job is to release insulin to help shuttle the glucose into the muscle and liver cells so it can be used for energy. Or it will shuttle glucose to fat for storage if those sites are already full. And when we are constantly in a state of activating the fight or flight response, and insulin is constantly being dumped into our bloodstream in an attempt to deal with the elevated levels of blood sugar brought about by elevated cortisol production due to stress, the receptor sites in our muscle and liver cells can get overwhelmed and literally become insensitive to insulin, which another way of saying that is our cells become deaf to insulin. So sugar isn't allowed into the cells. So more and more glucose gets shuttled into fat storage because it can't get into our muscle and liver cells. It can't get utilized for energy. And of course, the consequence of all of that is metabolic function hugely suffers. And most of you can relate to the sympathetic stress response, right, that I've described, the fight or flight response. Maybe you feel triggered when you're late to work, you've had an argument with your husband, you received an unexpected bill. Maybe you're experiencing the fight or flight response because you're imagining everything that could go wrong in the future, because you keep reliving all the difficult moments from your past. Or maybe you're just refusing to forgive yourself or others in your life. And maybe it's all of the above. Like all of that could be happening simultaneously. And I really want you to hear that both real and imagined stress ignite the sympathetic nervous system. So understanding how depleting stress can be to our physiology and even our psychology, hopefully you're starting to see how less calories and more exercise and huge expectations of what we are supposed to accomplish in a short period of time is only going to create more overwhelm, more stress, and ultimately more metabolic dysfunction within your cells. So, okay, great, Courtney. I'm not going to start, I'm starting to wrap my head around this concept of calorie restriction and aggressive exercise in a body that can't handle it being dangerous and not helpful. So where do I focus? Where do I put my attention? Well, where we would benefit greatly from putting more focus, especially when we're trying to focus on improving metabolic function, and when we're focusing on things specifically like fat loss, is to first and foremost learn how to re-engage our parasympathetic nervous system. That rest and digest system we have to get in the habit of utilizing it to balance out the chronic overuse of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, I know this goes completely against the grain of modern day living. No one's got time for it. But take a look around and ask yourself how well living in chronic fight or flight mode is working. We are sicker, heavier, more depressed, and more diseased than ever as a species. Dumping more stress on an already overburdened system is not the answer. So what is? Building resilience. And resilience is the result of spending time healing and fortifying your body. Resilience is the capacity to recover easily and quickly from difficulty. Resilience is ultimately what we want for ourselves, our chemistry, our tissues, our organs, our systems. Resilience is really what we want for our body, mind, and soul. Literally, from cell to soul, we want to become resilient to stress as much as possible. Does it mean you're never going to feel stress? Of course not. It means that when stress comes, you can handle it without breaking down. And like I said before, the human body is incredibly designed, and it has built-in mechanisms to deal with small doses of stress. For example, you have a liver that helps you to detoxify, right? Because toxins in the system are very stressful to the body. And you have hormones like cortisol that help you to manage stress in the body. But when you are marinating in a deep pool of stress because of your lifestyle choices, and combined with metabolic challenges that also may arise from your genetic blueprint and or the aging process, that's when we start challenging our body's resilience and we start experiencing breakdown in a lot of different ways. So stress is definitely a big problem to our metabolic health. Stress is a big problem in our ability to shed unwanted fat. And then we add the aging process to that. And we add our genetic blueprint to that. And you can see how it starts adding up in terms of why it can be so frustrating and challenging to shed fat. Please don't hear me saying impossible at all. You can't choose your genetic blueprint and you can't stop the aging process. What you do have tremendous power over is the ability to influence your resiliency, cell to soul, by way of your lifestyle choices. So how do we start healing and fortifying our body to promote everything working the way it's supposed to work? When I say everything working the way it's supposed to work, I'm speaking about your organs functioning properly, your gut functioning properly, your hormonal system functioning properly. If all of these things are working correctly, fat loss is absolutely a possibility for you. Sustainable fat loss. But what types of things are going to help us to heal those areas? Well, if you've never done 5 to Thrive, of course, I'm going to mention it here because I've designed a whole free 5-day program that you can register for. Just go to graceandgrit.com/5 to Thrive. It's a 5-part video series. And I talk about the lifestyle pieces that dramatically influence your capacity to heal and fortify. And all of these things are things you've heard before. I'm going to touch on all of them here in just a second. But the name of the game, my friends, is consistency. A lot of you are awesome at focusing on them for a week or a month or maybe a few months. And then you get distracted because life has a way of doing that. And the inconsistency does not heal and fortify. So I want to say this. I have seen the consistency around these 5 elements of 5 to Thrive, which I'll just throw them out here right now. Hydration, sleep, eating real food, movement, and managing your thoughts and emotions. Those are the 5. When you're doing those things consistently, I've seen those things move mountains in women. Mountains. And there are times where, of course, you are going to accelerate your process by getting more information about where the dysfunction actually is. Is it in your gut? Is your microbiome all jacked? If it is, right, that's so helpful to know. Do you have allergies to certain foods? Do you have certain hormones that are really out of whack? Is your thyroid not functioning properly? These are all things that if you are doing the elements of 5 to Thrive consistently, and you're feeling like it's not enough, these are the areas that I personally would recommend my clients get tested. Not all of them, right? Because usually after working with a client long enough, we kind of have a sense of where they need to be starting in order to start peeling back the layers of this information. But more information can be so tremendously helpful in helping a woman to better understand her body. So please don't hear me saying I'm opposed to any kind of testing or data. I think data is amazing in helping you to navigate your journey more effectively. So let me speak a little bit into each of these elements in terms of why they are so helpful in allowing you to manage stress better. So let's talk about food first. So nutritional stress is a very real thing for a lot of people this day and age. And let's start by just kind of defining what nutrition is. Nutrition is the process of taking in food, breaking it down, absorbing it into the bloodstream, and then using it for metabolic functions like growth, repair, and detox, just to name a few. So nutritional stress is anything that inhibits the body's ability to supply adequate nutrition that the cells need to perform metabolic functions. And when you eat things that your body doesn't recognize as food, or that your body has an intolerance to in some way, you will experience inflammation in some form. Because when the body doesn't recognize something, it will trigger the immune system to defend against it. So a high sugar diet, processed foods, alcohol, sugar, refined grains, combined with high levels of mental stress, which is like the American way of life, leads to insulin sensitivity and prevents our cells from getting what they need to function properly, which results in things like constant hunger, suppressed immunity, a disrupted microbiome, and of course, a lot of unwanted fat. Nobody wants that. So to lower nutritional stress, it makes a lot of sense that we eat foods that our body recognizes as food. Not too much, not too little, right? And we've got to eat things that lower the amount of sugar in our blood to help increase that cellular sensitivity to insulin. So what are the things that help us to do that, to help us lower the amount of sugar in our blood? Protein, fiber, healthy fats, lots of vegetables. I'll also mention here on the topic of nutritional stress, hydration. It can be so incredibly stressful to the body to be in a state of dehydration. Water is a nutrient and is responsible for a lot of metabolic processes, including transporting, dissolving, cleaning, padding, regulating, detoxifying. I always say, there's really not a process in the human body that doesn't involve water in some way. And drinking water regularly can make the body feel better so fast. And it's a really easy way to unload a lot of metabolic hardship. Not to mention, fat is processed via the liver. And that processing is a lot less efficient when your liver is congested because it's not adequately hydrated. And when we're talking about fat loss, a little geeky fact that some of you may not know, fat leaves the body through exhalation, so breath, urine, and sweat. All those processes require water. So if you're not drinking water, you probably have some liver congestion, and you're just making the whole fat loss process so much harder on your body. And I will mention here, I'm not going to go too deep into it because I've done entire episodes about this, but alcohol is not really your friend for so many reasons when it comes to fat loss. And the main reason being that your liver has to deal with alcohol when it's in your bloodstream. Your liver is also responsible for processing fat out of your body. So when you're consuming alcohol on a regular basis, you're pretty much putting your fat loss process on hold because your body has to contend with the alcohol in your bloodstream. So I'll leave that there for now, but I did feel like I needed to mention something about alcohol. So let's talk about movement. Physical exercise can be an incredible way to combat the negative effects of stress if you induce it and utilize it properly. Exercise that is too intense in a body that is already depleted can create a lot of that negative stress response, which is distress in the human body, and ends up robbing the body of even more resources that it could be using to properly rest and digest. So I feel like I've already made a strong case for this, that if you are going from sitting on the couch to boot camp class 7 days a week to try to lose fat, good luck with that. And the opposite, right? I'll also speak to the opposite, right? I'll give each of these arguments equal bandwidth here. Not moving enough, sitting all the time is also incredibly dangerous, right? It's also very stressful to the human body. Movement itself, I didn't say exercise, but just everyday ordinary movement and exercise makes us more insulin sensitive, which is what we want, right? We want our cells to be sensitive to insulin. We literally utilize blood sugar in our body when we're moving more. And it elevates the feel-good chemicals like dopamine and serotonin. Not moving stagnates cellular function. And a lot of you longtime listeners have heard me say this before. Stagnant places are where things go to die, not thrive. So like everything, we don't want too much, we don't want too little. There's like that fine balance of how much movement is healthy for your body. And your body is not my body. Your body is not your sister's body or your best friend or your coworker's body. How much movement you incorporate into your life, at what intensity, is really dependent on how much stress you are carrying in other areas of your life. Let me speak to recovery here, sleep specifically. You've got to take recovery seriously. Without adequate sleep, everything else you commit to in order to improve your health will be so incredibly difficult. I always say that if you're not getting enough sleep, doing the other things to improve your health will feel like moving through molasses. Sleep is where the magic happens, my friends. Your brain processes and caches out information. Your immune system is fortified. Your tissues grow and repair. Your energy is restored. Your hormones, are reworked and rewired. Your nerve cells are rewired. So sleep is a really big deal when it comes to metabolic function. But in our fast and furious world, women are treating it like a luxury they can't afford, and that is just so stinking dangerous. And I would also just say that, we're at this little bit of a disadvantage midlife because the decline of progesterone is also making sleep more difficult for a lot of women. And there's so many studies that link our lack of sleep to weight gain, specifically fat gain. So if you are struggling a lot with your fat, having a lot of unnecessary fat on your body, and you are not taking sleep seriously, it would be a remarkable place to start. And then finally, I just want to speak to mindset, because I feel like at this point in my career, this is the conversation that I am just so rooted in, because I believe it's everything. The stress response, like I said earlier, is induced by both real and imagined stress. So that hormonal cascade of events that I described earlier, it happens by thinking about real or imagined stressors. So while everything I've mentioned to this point can help you reduce stress in the human body, I want you to acknowledge that there are other factors that are not so easy to address. Because let's face it, the things I've talked about to this point, sleep, eating real food, hydrating your body, moving your body, these things are not hard. You might have storylines in your head that they're hard, but they're not really hard. But what is hard are the other things that may be affecting our total stress load in our life. The broken marriage, the soul-sucking career, the tape that is always playing, that negative self-chatter in your head. These are things that are not as easy to address. But man, do they affect your chemistry just as much as the food you eat, the sleep that you get, the movement that you do, the water that you drink. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on mindset today, because I do feel like the general message of the Grace and Grit podcast is all about mindset. I have talked about it pretty much in every episode, and there are so many episodes specifically dedicated to that topic. But I felt like it made a lot of sense to sort of wrap up this episode today by mentioning that, right? It's not just the little things that we can do in our life. It's also facing the big things that we keep avoiding, that we need to do, right? We need to stand face to face with those big things in order to help manage our total stress load. So I hope at the end of this episode, more than anything, you're starting to see why healing and fortifying your body is so important before you start adding more stress to the body. Because there is a time and place to add more stress to the body to elicit a fat loss response. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode. The timing of stress is everything. Because again, stress can be a beautiful thing, but it's got to be the right kind of stress at the right time. And this is something that I feel like a lot of people are missing the mark on. So I hope this was helpful. Again, I know it's so much content. There is so much more that I could say about all of this, but I really did kind of think through how to organize this in a way that would help you to walk away with some information today that you could start putting to good use and that wouldn't hopefully overwhelm your brain. And remember, overwhelm is always a choice, right? So you may have to listen to this podcast, maybe this episode a couple times to take in everything that I said. But I certainly hope it was helpful. And I love hearing that it's helpful, by the way. So if you've never left a review on iTunes, it's always helpful for me to have you do that. I'm totally open to constructive criticism. Just please be kind in the way that you deliver your criticism. And yeah, that's it. I have an amazing event coming up next month that is free. It is going to be an event called Creating Your Healthiest Year Yet. And I'm going to walk you through sort of 5 days of getting your brain and body prepared for making 2021, an incredibly remarkable year. So stay tuned for that. If you're not on my email list, that's a great way to stay in touch as well. And you can join that list by just going over to my website, graceandgrit.com. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this was useful, and I will see you again very soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.